Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Edge of Tomorrow. Episode 11. Chapter 89. Explain that again. I deadpanned, the tears that burned in my eyes turned to acid. It's exactly what it sounds like. Tori swallowed heavily, taking another chug from her second glass of water. Other than severe dehydration and low blood sugar, Tori was virtually unharmed. Her biggest injury was the bump on her forehead, and that was from her tumble when the gas had spewed into the room. She was incredibly lucky, especially considering the sudden influx of White Wolf kidnappings over the last 15 years. The High Table had been hiding it for quite some time, but it was surprising what Cade could find out when motivated by the kidnapping of his twin. While I was beyond elated that she was alive, there were a few things I was struggling to come to terms with. She had little to no information about where her and Alec had been taken. They had both passed out from the gas, and by the time Tori had awoken, Alec was gone. A wave of disappointment surged through me at that, so strong that the floor shifted beneath my feet. I tried and failed to cloak my emotions from Cade, and welcomed him when he came to stand behind me. His arms wound around my waist and anchored me here, keeping me from floating away to where Alec might be. She stayed in a room with rough walls and dirty floors, with the constant stench of mold and mildew in the air. Tori was able to narrow her location down to a basement, but that didn't help her much. The room had been fortified with silver, embedded in the walls and floors so that it might cause her the utmost pain. The only relief she had was from a shabby cot that sat a foot from the ground. Before she had a chance to learn anything new, Zayn Novak showed up to her rescue. Trust me, he didn't plan to be there. Tori scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. I could tell from the way she scrunched her nose that Zayn Novak was fairly low on her list. The stuck-up prick made that very clear. He only let me go because he knew Alec would be enough to string you along. Speaking of which, he wants a meeting with the two of you. A meeting with us? I hissed, my eyes flashing murderously at the thought of getting him in a room with Cade and I. Don't even think about it, he was specific about the requirements. Tori grunted and rolled her eyes. She was still flushed red, but that had happened more than often when she faced someone she absolutely loathed, and it was not hard to loathe Zayn Novak. He made sure to let me know he had a few white wolves that were helping him. They'd know if you told anyone else or came with backup. Great. Cade snarled under his breath. I could feel the tension in his jaw and shoulders as if it were my own, which some of it truly was. He most likely wants to demand terms for Alec. Those terms might include you, sweetheart. Which means, war might be coming sooner rather than later. His body was smooth stone when I ran my fingertips along the underside of his wrist. It comforted me that my touch made him soften, and made some of that fury seep from his bones. I was still afraid, but that fear reminded me of what I had to lose. I haven't had this strange family for long, but I had grown more attached than I ever thought possible, and there was no way I would go down without a fight. I know, and I'm ready for whatever comes. I told him, letting him feel the sincerity behind my words and the ruthlessness that would come when I faced our enemies. I'm not trying to interrupt this moment or anything, but there is something else. Tori swallowed heavily, her eyes averted and glued to some speck of dust on the wall. After a few moments, she looked at the two of us. I couldn't make anything out, though the haze of emotions she was feeling right now, none out of place for what she had been through. I want to be at this meeting. He thinks he can't trust me because I'm not close enough to you two. I want to prove him wrong. Who was I to question Tori's hatred towards Zayn Novak when I was building up an unhealthy amount for his father? Nearly an hour later, the three of us were dressed and silently inching our way down the hall towards where we planned to meet Zayn Novak. It was incredibly risky, and could even be catalogued as a very stupid move. We were meeting in a foreign territory, completely under his whim and terms. We were walking in absolutely blind. Cade was more than confident Zayn wouldn't try anything. His father isn't confrontational, at least not around certain people. Cade explained, he'd be pissed if Zayn is with either one of us, especially something this serious. Clearly, he doesn't want his father to know about this meeting, so he's going to want it to stay under the radar. I had decided to remain in my slate grey dress, despite the attendant's request to help me change into another. Cade wore a pair of black slacks and a black dress shirt. Under any other circumstances, I'd be completely enamored with his attire. He looked absolutely drool-worthy, with the sleeves of his shirt rolled up, exposing hardened arms with a spattering of onyx hair. Tori had showered and changed as well, and was looking a million times better. As the three of us walked down the hall, I kept her sandwiched between Cade and I. As much as I needed the reassurance of my mate, Tori needed it more. Her rescue had been mere chance, and she was lucky to be standing here right now. I briefly wondered if she had the chance to talk to her parents, but decided not to mention anything. Zayn had given Tori a specific floor, room, and time. It wasn't too difficult sneaking away from the guards that attended us. Most of the men were Alec and Cade's, which meant they wouldn't disobey an order from one of their alphas. Cade simply told them to give him some privacy for half an hour. Most would assume Cade and I wanted some alone time in between the stressful moments we endured, which was exactly what we wanted. Most of the heavy traffic in the hotel was on the first and second floors. The three of us saw little to no one on the upper floors of the hotel, which only served to make things more ominous. We turned corners and walked past end tables with blooming vases of flowers before finding the room we searched for. I could hear the individual breaths of each one of us as Cade knocked on the door. The sound was near silent, the sound of a heartbeat, and yet someone on the other side must have heard it. We all stepped back as the door opened and Zayn Novak appeared on the other end. "Well? Once you're finished gawking, I'd appreciate it if you came inside," he said smoothly, his voice laced with just enough venom to suit his expensive clothes and perfect hairstyle. This made Tori snort and Cade bristle. Despite the desperate desire to tear his head off, I made it through the door with my sanity intact. The hotel room was similar to the others, though the layout was entirely different. The furniture was still plush and modern, but held some comforting elements. Zayn glided across the room in his grey suit. The white tie he wore around his neck reminded me of his icy personality. He looked like a male model in a suit, all pretty and smooth. The only thing off-putting was the sour look etched onto his face. It seemed vastly out of place for someone with his looks. Tori bristled, and I anticipated the words that came from Zayn's mouth. "Don't act surprised to see me here." Tori snorted, waving him away with a hand. Even though she radiated pure malice towards Zayn, she refused to meet his eyes. If Cade noticed the same, he let nothing on. "You're just a puppet for your cruel dad. Get on with what you needed to say and let's be done with it. Since you're under the impression you know everything, I'm beginning to live for moments to prove you wrong." Zayn sneered, looking both handsome and ignorant. "Oh, I'm under the impression I know everything." Tori snarled, placing her hands on her hips as she stared down Zayn Novak. Zayn's crystal-clear eyes darkened, and his handsome persona looked just a tad more murderous. Tori matched his anger, and judging from the growl building in his chest, she had won. "You stubborn, insufferable enough. You're wasting our time if this is why you've called us here. My mate is missing and you played a part in it." I snapped, feeling the last of my collective patience fracture. Zayn's attention was pulled from Tori, and I was surprised to see some of that anger vanish. It was replaced with unwavering suspicion. I wanted to laugh for a moment. He was acting as though we were the bad guys. I assume she fed you what I told her. Zayn spoke quiet yet firm, content on completely ignoring Tori altogether. She seemed happy doing the same. I didn't trust her, so I fed her what I figured she'd expect. You lied. Tori snorted, breaking their silent battle in record timing. Her voice turned sickly sweet. Bullshit, Novak. You told me you only let me go because I was useless. Alec was all they needed, why would they need a tag-along friend? I lied, but not entirely. He shrugged, not even turning to meet her eyes. That made her fume, her pale skin erupting in flame. She was holding back, I could feel it in the way she attempted to rein her emotions in. It would have drawn too much attention to let Alec go. You were the least noticeable option. Least noticeable? What part did you play in Alec being taken? Cade's serrated voice cut through Tori's soprano as though it were tissue paper. Zayn met Cade's eyes without flinching, but gave him an assessing stare that made me feel much too exposed. Not as big a part as some others. Zayn replied smoothly, his face a passive mask as he said the words that would stun me for time to come. It doesn't matter at this point, because you're going to help me. In return, I'll get you your mate back. Chapter 90. I hadn't really known the twins all that long, around 6 months if you wanted to be more accurate. We bonded quickly, though it was much longer for werewolf standards. The bond helped us all feel familiar and comfortable around one another, but there were still things I didn't know about my dashing mates. One of those things was how truly terrifying Cade was when in a murderous rage. I had seen him on the battlefield, though my attention was horribly divided between him and his injured brother. I had seen him move in wolf form, but there was something sickeningly attractive about watching Cade move in his human body. Cade raced forward, much faster than Tori or I could intercept, and barreled into Zayn. Even in a suit, he was much faster than I would have anticipated. Unfortunately, Cade was faster. Cade, don't! My mouth clamped shut as Tori's heightened voice rang out, practically drowned by the snarling coming from the two men. Her words surprised me, but her emotions, they left me near incapacitated. If she noticed I picked up on what she felt, she made no move to tell me. Her eyes were glued to Cade and Zayn, both seconds away from another rage-fueled frenzy. The two of them grappled and fought against one another for dominance, but Cade was bloodthirsty and ready to exact his pound of flesh. His hand clasped around Zayn's throat, nearly covering the entire thing. I could see the small ruby-like beads of blood that emerged from his neck. There was no reflection of pain or fear on Zayn's face. I could feel just a bit of fear in his emotions, but that only proved he wasn't a complete and utter fool. Tori's emotions seemed to jolt me from my shock, and I reached out to Cade with everything I had. I didn't just pull on our bond, I pulled it until all of my energy was expunged. Cade's body jerked, like he had been electrocuted. I registered the pain in his emotions and cringed. I might have put a little too much energy into getting his attention. Enough, you've done enough. I told him softly, placing my hand on the wrist that currently kept Zayn plastered to the wall. My heart ached as I looked at Cade, his eyes black with murder and desperation. They couldn't feel his emotions like I could, they couldn't feel the storm that raged, but never once gave him a break from their torment. The dark strands of his hair fell forward into his face, and his chest heaved from heavy breaths. Zayn was a statue carved from the wall, making no move or sound that might set Cade off again. I shouldn't have been surprised that Zayn was utterly calm in the face of death, or that he was used to this kind of violence, but I was. I let out a breath of my own when Cade responded to my touch, releasing his hold on Zayn. I let him compose himself, and watched as he placed a poorly constructed mask on his face. My touch was enough to keep him from murdering Zayn, but it did nothing to chase away that burning urge to kill something. As soon as Cade was a healthy distance away from Zayn, I turned on Tori. She couldn't ignore what she saw in my eyes, not when it shined so clearly. Her face was red from the brawl between Zayn and Cade, but paled considerably as she met my eyes. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. What could she say? She couldn't deny what her emotions knew true. "Claire, don't," she croaked when my eyes darted over towards Zayn. Zayn was still stoic against the wall, and the coloring was coming back into his face. He said nothing about the exchange that was going on between Tori and I, but he did meet my stare with one of his own. He faced me without rebuke, even though I knew the one thing that could put a kink in his slimy life. "We can talk about this completely pointless topic, or we can discuss how to return your maid to you," Zayn said evenly, his voice glacier cold. He didn't spare Tori a single glance, and I flinched at the pain that coursed through her. She was muffling it, burying it down deep, but I felt it. I felt it even when she wouldn't, and it hurt. Coal-hot claws tugging down my chest, slowly as they pressed deeper and deeper. Zayn's emotions were another mess altogether. I could feel no remorse, no desire, no pain radiating from him. His emotions were so suppressed, so warped and twisted that I wondered if he had ever felt a genuine speck of happiness in his life. In that moment, one of the last shards of innocence within me chipped. My heart shattered for my friend. It shattered for Tori when I lashed out with my abilities, and I felt that severed bond twisted around her soul, the bond Zayn Novak had rejected. I took one glance at Tori and knew she didn't want to talk about this, not here and not now. I gave Zayn a stiff nod, now feeling my own murderous urges bubble towards the surface. It was one thing to take my mate from me, but now he rejected my only friend? I wasn't sure who paired us mates up, but I wanted to curse at them for this particular match. Tori deserved better, and Zayn deserved someone as slimy and foul as himself. I have something I need done for me. If I could have gone to anyone else, I would. As it stands, you're the most useful and the last person my father would expect to help. Zayn continued in a frosty voice, "Help me, and I'll help you." Alec might just find the door to his cell wide open one night. Cade let out a snarl that Zayn somehow had the balls to ignore. I figured I'd do the talking for Cade, at least until he calmed down enough to say a coherent word. "Answer my previous question and we might talk, and no more of that vague bullshit," I replied. I forced my voice to remain steady and smooth, even though I wanted to shout until my throat bled. I matched his iciness with some of my own, and hoped he choked on the shards. "My father is responsible, obviously," Zayn replied, rolling his eyes in a way that looked a tad immature for his heightened ego and future status. "His one mistake is our only hope. Typically, my father doesn't care who knows about our other businesses. So long as what he keeps secret, remains secret." "What is this big secret?" Cade spat, finally suppressing his anger enough to speak. When Zayn remained silent, Cade smiled dangerously. "You want to help, but you won't go against dear Dad." Cade laughed. It was an empty sound that rattled around the hollow parts of me Alec left behind. "There's not a chance I'm trusting you." "That sounds a shame, because I'm willing to trust you a lot." Zayn snapped back, taking on Cade's particular fondness of obscenities. "I need someone who hates my father enough not to rat me out, because this could benefit us both." You want Alec back and to help some white wolves out? Done. Help me and we can do that. Suddenly you care about white wolves? Cade asked darkly, is that who's helping you with this meeting? Why don't they come out then? The people who help me have just as much to lose as I do if we are caught. Zayn replied, his lips pressed into a tight line. This time he faced me, and his words sent a chill skittering down my spine. My father collects white wolves, that is his secret. He wants you, vehemently. You would be the crowning piece to his collection. You can run along and tell someone, chances are they'll be dead before the morning. Or, you could listen to me. I'm not stupid enough to trust you, and nor should you do the same. We both want something, and we can both help. It's an idiotic move not to take this chance. I've risked enough just meeting with you, let alone telling you this. His words confirmed what I had already known deep down. Bright side, the most powerful member of the High Table wanted me alive. To control, use and own, for his own slimy purposes. He can't be serious. I scoffed for what might have been the 6th time since returning to our current rooms. Tori sat on the bed, glaring down at her hands. She had snuffed out that tendril of sadness that sprouted within her, and replaced it with stubbornness and anger. Cade leaned against the wall, still looking incredible as ever in his business attire. He can't own someone. I said, again. I'm not sure how this magic, werewolf world works, but slavery is illegal. It was a huge mistake when it happened the first time. Haven't werewolves learned from that? There's always those who want to throw the world into darkness again. Cade grunted, werewolves don't include themselves in human history much. We have our own battles fought and won. There might have been a few packs that fought in some human wars though, but we don't learn about them. That's good to know. I muttered, mentally scolding myself. Some part of me had already known this would happen, possibly even back when I had first met Sage. I thought about the old woman often, and hoped her life was still beautiful and simple. What I needed now was to toughen up. There was no use in complaining. I squared my shoulders and swallowed my fear before turning to face Cade. The first thing I'm going to do when I take my seat on the High Table, is set every enslaved white wolf free. I said, sounding much more confident than I felt. I know it won't be as easy as it sounds, but I'm willing to figure it out. What I cannot do is sit here afraid and practically walk into Marcus Novak's arms. I won't be controlled, especially by the likes of him. Cade paused for a moment, looking me over as he leaned against the wall like a stone-carved Adonis. After a few heavy seconds, he smirked and strolled over to me. Even with the abyss in my heart from Alec's absence, Cade's smirk made my heart do tap dances in my chest. There's my girl. He murmured, lifting my chin until his lips brushed against my own. The action was so soft and sweet that it left me a bit breathless, and as always, wanting more. Before I could have anything further, Cade nodded in Tori's direction and pulled away. It seems the two of you have things to talk about. He noted in a low voice, intended for my ears alone. The next words he said were laced with intimacy and a fierce yet desperate protectiveness that spanned beyond normal means. It was an I love you that reflected the strangeness in Cade. I won't be far, I promise. The moment he left, I turned on Tori. I hesitated for a moment, gauging the situation. I wasn't exactly sure how she would react. Tori was one of the strongest women I knew. She was someone who took everything life gave her head on, and battled it into submission with sheer will and determination. But this was different. She had told me about rejection, a short while after I finally accepted Alec and Cade. I understood why the twins didn't mention it, especially after experiencing Tori's emotions firsthand. Rejection, it was a knife to the soul. So much different than a physical wound, and twice as deadly. It was a constant, never-ending pain which led to a shortened life. Tori deserved so much more than that. I realized she had stood from the bed, and stared in shock when she smiled at me. My eyes were watery, I realized. There were tears blossoming, brought on from the torment of her emotions and the realization that my best friend had been rejected. Don't cry, don't. If I start crying, I don't think I'll be able to stop. And I'll murder you if you make me miss this high table meeting. She scolded me, grabbing my hands in her own. I sniffled and laughed miserably, pulling myself together in record-breaking speed. Look, I'm sorry I didn't tell you. No, I mean, hell. I've made a few mistakes myself, but I can't blame you. I admitted. I geared myself up to ask the one thing I was dreading. I needed to hear her say it, but I also hoped that my abilities were wrong on this one. So he actually did it, didn't he? Her shoulders slumped just a bit, but her smile never faltered. He did. The stupid prick rejected me, not that I've particularly lost much. Have you seen his personality? He's seriously lacking, and the daddy issues are through the roof. She huffed, sounding much more like her usual self. It made me a bit relieved to see her flair was back, because how could she live a short life when she seemed so alive? Can you believe it, Claire? I'm an alpha's Luna. I guess my bossiness comes from somewhere. Unfortunately, I've had the pleasure of seeing Zayn Novak for exactly what he is. I rolled my eyes, earning a smirk from her. Obviously, I can believe it. I'm beginning to think I have some kind of foresight going on because I called it back at the cabin. With all the crap that's going on, I don't think you need another ability. She snickered, only half serious. Chapter 91. Take a deep breath, sweetheart. Cade chuckled in my ear, but I was not oblivious to the tension in his own emotions. We were being escorted down to the second floor, where the meeting would take place. The entire floor was heavily guarded, and was much wider and more open than the other floors. Do not speak unless you're called on. A tan-skinned woman in a pencil skirt warned Cade and I. She walked effortlessly in her heels, swaying her hips like a runway model. If they wish for you to speak, they'll call on you. That's your chance. You can also call as many witnesses as you please, so those you came with are free to speak on your behalf. Cade and I had been debriefed as much as possible, but nothing could prepare us for what the outcome might be. Other than Marcus Novak, we hadn't a clue what the other high table members might want. I adjusted the dress I wore and grimaced as the rigid material rubbed against my bare leg. The heels I wore sent little clicks and clacks echoing through the hallway. They were miserable to walk in, and horribly loud. My feet already ached, and we hadn't even begun. These shoes are going to be the death of me, if the high table doesn't kill me first. I huffed under my breath, glancing at the group of silent bodyguards that escorted us down the hall. Cade's arm was the only thing that kept me from tumbling forward. I had never worn heels before, and though my legs looked incredible, they were becoming a nuisance to walk in. We entered through a set of wooden doors, which led into a huge room. It was much like what a courtroom would look like, only with a few alterations. The 5 high table members sat at the head of the room, with guards placed comfortably on either side. Scattered throughout the room were clusters of families, alphas to other notable packs. Their personal insignia were emblazoned on a bronze plaque that hung on their respective sections. The witnesses, I realized, there were so many. They openly talked with one another, and even spoke across the narrow walkways that lead to the center of the room. There was a box of my own at the center of the room, 20 feet away from the high table members. As our scent flooded the room, and people began to notice us, everyone fell silent. Cade's hand flattened against my back when I sucked in a sharp breath. The emotions were lashing out at me, flashing through my mind and body at a rate that was disorienting. My skin crawled from the multitude of emotions. There was a lot of fear and hatred, but there was also a lot of curiosity. Curiosity could be a good thing. Cade glanced down at me, conveying what he could with his eyes. We couldn't speak freely here, and this wasn't the time for public displays of affection. I kept my face neutral, though I really wanted to scream. There were so many ugly emotions battering me, and I had to constantly shove them back in order to focus. Now entering, Alpha Cade and his mate, Claire. A man who stood beside the main doors spoke loudly to the room. If there had been anyone left talking, they were all silent now. Cade and I were escorted over to our own personal section, practically at the center of the room. I felt all eyes on me, a spectacle, an animal in the midst of other animals. In our section sat Cade, his parents, Tori, Garrett, and Julian. Each one met my eyes as Cade and I took our seats. Silence engulfed the room, and Marcus Novak stood from his seat at the very head of the room. His navy suit matched his stormy eyes perfectly, capturing the blue within their depths. He was beautiful in a smooth and shiny way, free of any blemish that might reveal him as human. His son was much the same way. In fact, sitting towards the left-hand side, in a space of his own, was Zayn Novak. Marcus did not acknowledge his son as he stood and took the room's attention. It's been hundreds of years since we've had a gathering as large as this. There has not been a need for discussion this urgent in so very long. Marcus greeted the room, sweeping wide with his arm. As it stands, the longevity of our species has been the high table's priority. Our kind has been flourishing for the last 50 years, in ways we haven't before. No matter the results of these meetings, we are here to protect our kind, and ensure its success. His voice was rich and smooth, perfectly balanced as it stretched to all corners of the room. Even his emotions were calm and balanced, like perfectly smooth waters. There was nothing about this man that revealed a monster within. There were murmurs throughout the room, and I found myself tuned into every emotion that fluttered my way. To the right of me were a small group of people. In their own section, sat an Alpha and Luna. Both had a guard with them, but were watching the spectacle with a calm expression. Their hair was golden, and their eyes a rich shade of caramel. They were both tanned, letting me know they lived somewhere warm and bright. I could feel the underlying tension within their emotions, the distaste whenever Marcus Novak spoke. It was a realization on my part, that my abilities could be used in ways I had never anticipated. I made a note of them in my mind, perhaps they might be persuaded into changing sides. Let the meeting commence. Marcus commended, taking a seat once more. I call Philip Heald to the stand. Braden Cliff was the first to speak, much to my surprise. He eyed me from where he sat, his grey eyes calculating and interested. I was sure he could read the surprise on my face. I hadn't a clue who Philip Heald was, much less what he had to do with me. Philip Heald was many werewolf men looked like. Muscular and large, even with his greying hair and patchy beard. He emerged from a section across the room, and began walking towards the middle. This stranger I had never met before stood at the center of the room, addressing the high table on a matter that involved my life. The pieces clicked together moments later when Braden Cliff began speaking again. You were witness to the rogue attack that had taken place on April 23rd. Correct? He asked, leaning forward in his seat. Yes, I was witness to that attack, fought in it myself. Wouldn't be here if I weren't worried about my alphas. They're not like their father. This girl, she's bringing some pretty heavy stuff to my pack, stuff we're not equipped for. He grunted, clearing his throat. Cade stiffened from where he stood, and it took me a moment, but I recognized this man's face. He was someone I had seen in town a few times, usually emerging from the hardware store. He was always covered in grease, but I had never given him much thought. A sharp pain stung my chest at the thought of a pack member speaking against me, but I steeled myself. Cade was fuming, but I knew he could keep it together for this meeting. Feeling someone's emotions makes it hard to be angry, because I understand the reasoning behind those decisions. Philip was concerned, worried for the twins he had watched grow up. No matter how much it hurt, he thought he was doing the right thing. Would you explain the details of that event? More specifically, when Ms. Claire found herself in battle. Brayden clarified, all but ignoring what Philip had said. Yes, things were going to shit, there were too many of them. Biggest battle I've seen in my time, but that's not saying much. Alpha Alec was wounded, nothing serious. He would have recovered if she hadn't trounced onto the battlefield. The girl nearly got both our alphas killed. They were too worried about her to concentrate on the rogues. He grunted, glancing over towards Cade. He paled significantly, but still managed to turn and continue. She got overwhelmed, used that power of hers. She started howling, nearly split my ears. All them rogues started actin' strange, fell to the ground like they were in pain. They were writhin' and screamin'. Didn't stop until she quit her howling and collapsed. Yes. Brayden nodded thoughtfully. That will be all, Mr. Heald. I would like Ms. Claire to come to the stand. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I instinctively tensed beside Cade. Every instinct I had was telling me not to stand at the center of the room, that it was much too close to Marcus Novak and his son. It was telling me that though they were the worst, there were other monsters in this room. Cade squeezed my hand, and I used his touch to force my limbs to move. I walked rather stiffly to the stand, trying not to shiver when all of those eyes were placed on my shoulders. Marcus Novak regarded me with interest, an almost familiar smile on his face. Desmond Deville smirked, and looked me up and down like some kind of frat boy. Brayden Cliff had that calculating look on his face, as though he were mentally dissecting me. Jasper Fox had absolutely nothing on his face, no trace of interest or emotion. He was leaned back in his seat, clad in leather pants and a vest. He was the most unconventional of the bunch. I could feel the hostility that radiated from Sebastian Sable. Pure disgust and fury whenever he sneered my way. Ms. Claire, can you confirm Philip Heald's accounts of the rogue attack on your mate's pack? Brayden Cliff asked in his smooth voice, slicking back his wheat-colored hair. Did you use your abilities to harm those rogues? Philip Heald's account of the battle was correct, and yes, I did use my abilities on the rogues. I nodded firmly, forcing my voice to remain steady. It was hard, speaking this loud without faltering, but I managed. I couldn't help but add this last bit, forcing a bit of sweetness into my voice. I could feel my mate's pain, and I ran to defend. As I'm sure you can tell, their pack is mine, just as much as my two are theirs. I left out the part where I had absolutely no clue what I was doing, and that the power had exploded from me without any rhyme or reason. It had been pure luck and rage that directed my power onto the rogues. So, it seems she has some semblance of control over her abilities, no matter how slim. Brayden mused. It proves she can be taught, but to what extent? Desmond Deville asked, surprising me a bit. There is no one to teach the young wolf. Desmond Deville was easily around 35, and was currently the oldest unmated male. He was handsome in a woodsy, rugged way. There were some light lines on his face, but they only added to his looks. His hair was the color of rust, thick and full on his head. His smile was one of sweet poison, expectant and alluring. Many white wolves come into their abilities naturally. If she already has this shred of control, more will come in time. Brayden flashed Desmond a disapproving look and continued. Maybe it was a fluke. Sebastian Sable cut in with an oily smile. If I could have guessed what a psychopath felt like, it would have been this particular high table member. Sebastian and Marcus were two sides of the same coin. Marcus was charm and smile, Sebastian was blood and vengeance. Maybe she has no idea what she's doing. How can we trust her power won't just emerge again? Despite the understandable concerns of Alpha Sebastian, I do believe in the preservation of life in extraordinary circumstances. Marcus Novak chimed in, sounding as though he were actually on my side. If I didn't know how he was, I would have fully believed him. He seemed so genuine and sincere as he smiled down on me. This ability has not been seen in thousands of years. Should we not discover what Ms. Claire's purpose is in this world? How might she better our species, and preserve our longevity? You wish for her to work for the High Table? Desmond Deville blinked in surprise, which soon morphed into a coy smile. I wouldn't particularly mind that. Her development would be under our supervision, as well as at our disposal. I'm not some toy you can pass around. My power isn't at everyone's disposal. I blurted without absolutely any regard. I could feel Cade's surprise, but was shocked at the perverse joy that hid beneath. He was enjoying how I defended myself, how I snarled at these self-absorbed men. I wouldn't make myself small and docile for them. Chapter 92. The room was silent for a few long seconds before the room erupted in chaos. Witnesses were shouting on all sides, emotions flung like daggers at my neck and chest. Many were outraged that I dare disrespect the High Table. They hurled insults my way, blaming my upbringing. Much to my surprise, there were some coming to my defense. Though their voices weren't as loud, they shouted that I had a right to stake claim on my life and abilities. They accused the High Table of becoming too powerful, a thought that made me shiver. I couldn't help but notice that the Alpha and Luna with the golden hair remained silent, their emotions conveying no animosity towards me. The chaos lasted a total of 5 seconds before Marcus Novak silenced the room with a wave of his hand. Enough, we cannot blame the girl for her outbursts. She was not raised on our values and customs, so she can and will be excused. Marcus told the room. The flimsy compliment made me narrow my eyes. It is understandable that we might be eager to explore your abilities, Claire. You are unique, incredibly so. Abilities such as these are gifted to the world for a reason. Think of this as an opportunity to discover that very reason. I very much believe that working with the High Table might provide you the answers you've been looking for, whilst aiding us in our endeavor to better our species. Marcus Novak was very good with his words, infecting the crowd with his subtle poison. There were murmurs of agreement and even those insisting I offer aid to smaller packs. I could feel my walls closing in on me, a million greedy hands tearing at my clothing, my hair, and limbs. They all wanted something from me, each and every one. It took me a moment to realize that Marcus Novak wasn't asking, he was insisting. I see the concern on your face, Miss Claire. I can only imagine what you must feel in this room, from each and every one of us. How truly incredible! Marcus smiled softly, his perfect mask locked in place. I have no intention of forcing your hand, though it has long been custom between the packs of the United States to exchange bargains and create deals. While I cannot speak for my fellow alphas, I am very much interested in working with you. Should any of my fellow colleges wish to work with you, they will provide their terms. Now, if you wish to refuse us, we might speak again on what your future shall look like, and any other concerns we might have. It was this moment that I realized how dangerous Marcus Novak was. To the public he was this incredible figure of honor and prosperity, spouting his dreams about preserving our kind. In reality, he was a power-hungry sociopath with a knack for manipulation and good looks. To many in the room, what Marcus said was generous. I should be elated that the regal high table would want my services, that they would want to work with me. It was an incredible honor that I did not want. But to them, it was crime to simply want to live my life. All while Marcus offered me this incredible chance, my other mate was sitting in cum cell. It made me want to scream, to throw everything I had at the five of them. I could feel my power surge through my body, and dug my fingers into the wooden podium that stood before me. Jasper Fox moved his head, making his shaggy hair shift. He leaned forward in his seat and squinted his eyes. It was the first sign of interest I had seen in him. Even his emotions were disinterested and even bored. Now, he was curious. The power that bubbled in me vanished at the surprise, and Jasper's disinterest quickly returned. Let us adjourn for the time being, to think on these negotiations that will be the start of history for our kind. Marcus Novak beamed at the room. We will resume tomorrow. For those of you who wish to remain in our stands, please await further instruction. And just like that, my first meeting with the high table was over. I desperately wished it were my last. This hotel was reserved solely for the high table and its meetings, which meant we could stay here until a decision had been made. It was blindingly clear that the high table would soon come to a decision, and that I might not like the outcome. We met with Julian, Garrett, and the twins' parents after the meeting. I was becoming edgy without Alec, and I was sure the others could see me unraveling. Both Julian and Garrett dispatched their own fighters. I noticed how neither hesitated, even though Garrett still looked a bit sour. I appreciated the gesture, but nothing would soothe that madness inside of me except for Alec. Afterwards, the three of us returned to our rooms. I was feeling a bit claustrophobic with all these guards around, a constant wall between you and everyone else. It only reminded me of the danger here. A servant was granted entrance to the room to serve us dinner. Tori, Cade, and I sat around a small table, eating silently. That went to shit pretty quickly. Tori rolled her eyes. So, you either work with them, or they say you're an uncontrollable weapon. At least I get to pick between the five of them. I commented dryly, taking another bite of my burger. It tasted like ash after the meeting, but I needed something in my stomach. Does the food usually come with a note? Tori asked randomly, lifting my plate to pick up a small note card. She flipped it in her hands and stared at the back. Her eyebrows grew closer with every second, until a scowl tore across her face. I could already tell from her emotions who the card was from, even though I hadn't a clue what it said. What does he want now? I frowned, plucking the card from her fingers when she turned her head sourly. The note read, Room 412, 7 p.m. Do not be late, these meetings are hard enough as is. N. As much as I'm beginning to loathe him, we need to get Alec back. I sighed sharply, pinching the bridge of my nose when my head began to ache. I gave Tori an apologetic look. If you want to miss this meeting, I understand. If not, you're welcome to come with us. I know, Claire. You don't have to explain yourself to me. Tori's smile was small, but friendly. I'm not going to hide from the prick. He's not important enough for that. We stood outside of room 412 nearly 2 hours later. It had taken ages to divert the guards, but my abilities had come in handy when it came to detecting anyone nearby. Turns out, I could sense emotions up to a certain distance away. With some concentration I could feel how far and close those emotions were. They helped a lot when trying to identify the oncoming guards. We slipped inside the room, and my eyes tried to adjust as we stepped into low lighting. Only 2 small lamps were lit, the light dull and yellow. Zayn was leaning against the countertop, his arms crossed over his chest. His suit jacket was folded over the chair in the small dining room. "You look ruffled." Torai noted a bit indignantly, arching an eyebrow at him. "This was the first meeting, and it's already going to shit. Are you not also ruffled?" He sneered, pushing off the counter to approach Tori. "Working with her is only the beginning. Once she steps foot on my father's territory she is gone. Do you think there will be proof? Maybe you believe one of the other members will help her. If so, you're a fool. You'll waste your own resources trying to get her back, and destroy your pack in the process. It is absolutely, fucking hopeless. The ship is sinking, and you can either jump the FCK off, or go down with it." I paused with bated breath, stepping back from the tension that radiated off the two of them. That kind of hostility, it would come to a head, and soon. Whoever had made them mates, I wondered if they knew how explosive they would be. "Nothing is hopeless, Novak. There will always be a way. You have to keep fighting to change things." Torai scoffed, "You might be jumping ship, but I plan on staying behind to fix the thing. Let's not prolong this. I'd like my brother back before the month is up." Cade's snarl rippled through the room, cutting through their tension and dismantling it. "Fight when this is through. It's time to hold up to your end of the bargain." Zayn grimaced, the fire in his eyes fizzling out. I felt a flash of worry in his emotions, but he had smothered it rather than give it life. "There are a few white wolves I know of that need safekeeping, and I need them to stay in your pack." Cade was just as stunned as I. "This wasn't what we expected, not by a long shot. You want us to hide some white wolves?" I reiterated a bit slowly, "Why these specific white wolves? They aren't very powerful. If they were, they'd be noticed." Zayn commented gruffly, "I owe a friend a favor, this is that favor." Cade paused for a long moment and looked my way. "We're going to need more details if we're to transport them to our land. You're willing to risk war if we're caught?" Zayn asked, his head tilted just a bit. It was a slight show of interest in his sour demeanor. This time, Cade's answer was immediate. "This agreement will not change the war that's sure to come." Chapter 93. Marcus Novak considered himself a collector, but things became difficult when your possessions were living humans with thoughts, feelings, and a will of their own. His own son had slowly begun to turn against him, though not for the same reasons most would. For reasons completely unknown to the three of us, Zayn Novak needed a group of 10 white wolves transported from his father's territory. It was strictly a stealth mission, in and out. The white wolves would be deposited at the edge of Marcus's territory by an ally. Our job is to transfer those white wolves to our territory. Being caught would ensure a huge mess, one most of us might not escape from. Marcus Novak would have all rights to attack us for taking something of his. If we were to be the ones venturing on his territory, death sentence. So long as Marcus remained in the dark, all parties were safe. Navia and Isaac, they're the most important. They have to get out at all costs. The others will stay behind and help them escape if need be. Zayn told the three of us, a sour look on his face as we committed the details to memory. What makes the two of them important? Cade asked. All business. I stuck close to Cade, using his towering form to give me some confidence. Any abilities we need to know about? Isaac can help. He's good with emotions, in a different way than you, Claire. Navia, not so much. Zayn replied curtly. I tried to suppress my surprise as he said my name for the first time. It wasn't progress, as much as I wished it were so for Tori's sake. What he said next sobered the three of us a bit. She's pregnant, there's no telling what the kid might be. It's only a matter of time before my father grows impatient. You can't speed a pregnancy along. Even Marcus Novak can't force nature. I scoffed defensively. It was more a reflex than anything else, a need to put down the monster that reared its head. A monster with the face of Marcus Novak. He has no need for Navia. He keeps her around because she's Isaac's mate. Her abilities are incredibly rare and unique, but they are passive. My father has no use for passive abilities. Zayn replied darkly, if the kid's powerful enough, he might not need Isaac either. The baby's been showing signs lately, doing magic from inside the womb. Not only do they have limited options, but they're also running low on time. We had 24 hours to come up with some sort of plan. Come tomorrow night, we would need to act. Alec, when do we get Alec back? I said a bit frantic. Zayn must have seen something urgent and unpleasant in my eyes, as he felt the need to take a few steps back before replying. I could feel myself bristle at his words, even if I did understand his side of things. I'll help your mate when these wolves are safely transported. He replied thickly, his eyes darting between Cade and I as though one of us might lunge for his throat. Again, I couldn't blame him. If it isn't clear I am trusting you with these wolves' lives. Even after I help your mate, you'll still have them in your custody. All I have is your word that you will not harm them, and you haven't even given me that. Somehow you don't strike me as the type of guy to honor someone's word. Tori snorted in Zayn's direction, her words neat and venomous. There's very little you actually know about me. He replied cold and flat, but that didn't deter the inferno that was Tori. Let's see. Self-centered, rich, spoiled, sadistic. Tori nodded to herself, ticking each attribute off on her finger. As much as I wanted to stop her, she deserved this. Just as Zayn deserved to be reminded of his idiotic choices. You're like a diamond, Novak. All pretty and shiny to look at, but at the end of the day, it's just a rock. I could feel the tension in the room snap, but even with the forewarning, my reaction wasn't fast enough. Zayn snarled and lunged at Tori. Instinctively, I darted to place myself in between the two. Cade's arm created a cage around my midsection, pinning me against him. I remembered the vague comments about werewolves and dominance, something the twins had told me when I first returned to town. Proving yourself through trials and tribulation, that was a huge part of belonging to a pack. I'm not sure what Zayn was trying to accomplish. Whether it was the fractured mate bond, or Zayn's own warped morals, he didn't seem to be trying to kill Tori. Zayn's hands grasped the tops of Tori's arms, as he pushed her back towards the wall. He snapped at her neck with semi-elongated teeth, and it took me a moment to realize what he was doing. Tori dug into the thick carpet that covered the floor and pivoted. The movement was smooth and graceful, leaving Zayn against the wall. She slammed her weight into his gut, and I couldn't suppress my smile when he grunted. Tori stood on her toes until her eyes reached his, and snarled in his face with a voice that was full-blooded Luna. I will not submit to you, Zayn Novak. She snarled, spitting the very flames that lived within her curly locks. I will only bend my knee to someone I can follow. You are a selfish, misguided, coward that has so much power, so more than he realizes. Power to change things, but you won't. The world is made of miserable men like you. Zayn took every insult and spiteful word, pulling them into the snowstorm that constantly clung to him. His eyes were shards of ice as they burrowed into Tori's skin. What was even more interesting, his face was flushed. Rosy red across his cheeks and down his neck. The blinding rage he felt, it was the first emotion I had sensed from him. The first unbridled, human emotion. It wasn't encased in ice like the rest. Tori turned her back on her mate, who was both hero and villain, and left the suite with her head held high. The three of us called a meeting with Julian, Garrett, and the twins' parents. For the time being, we were shifting our focus from Alec to these white wolves. It made me sick thinking about it, but we only had 24 hours. I reminded myself that this would get us Alec back, but even that was making my ears ache. Both Tori and I were escorted back to our rooms one floor below. Cade decided to stay with Julian and Garrett for a few more hours, planning out what I was now calling, the Great White Wolf Heist. I lay curled up on the sectional in the suite, bleary-eyed and heavy-hearted. I had tried tugging down Alec and I's bond, like I did with Cade. I could still feel the bond there, but something was blocking it. 1 hour and a massive headache later, a knock sounded on the door. I tiptoed over and looked through the peephole, seeing nothing. What was even more worrisome was the fact that there were no posted guards at our room tonight. We had our own men watching over us, but there were none tonight. I chalked it up to some kind of scheduling error and cracked open the door. Sitting on the floor was a small and plain note card. While it looked as though it were from Zayn, the handwriting was entirely different. Not nearly as neat as Zayn's handwriting, and a few lead smudges made me wonder if the author were left-handed. It wasn't the room or floor number that caught my attention, but the scribbled note at the bottom. If you want to stop Marcus Novak, meet me at 11 sharp. Cade was still with Garrett and Julian, and I knew heading off on my own was dangerous, so I stopped by Tori's room. After a few knocks and several minutes, I figured she'd went to bed. I knew it wasn't a great idea, but if the note were true, we needed those kinds of allies. I was near certain the note was from the golden-haired Alpha and Luna, the ones who very clearly detested Marcus. I crept through the silent hotel hallways, smelling air freshener and previously washed laundry. My phone was snug in my back pocket, and I kept a hand on it in case this was all a huge mistake or worse, a trap. I slipped inside the darkened suite and jumped when the door slid shut. The lighting was poor, but I could clearly make out a large form over by the bookshelves. Reclining on a leather love seat with a scotch in hand was none other than Desmond Deville. I wondered if you'd show up. Desmond mused in that musical voice of his. Both gravely and smooth, much like the scotch he was drinking. I find gambling enlightening. You can learn so much about a person based on what choices they've made. I'm not really here for chit-chat. I cleared my throat, shifting uncomfortably on my feet at his amusement. His gaze was thick and oily, and I knew it would take a few showers before I no longer felt his eyes on me. Desmond Deville wasn't an attractive man. For someone in his mid-30s, he looked incredible. His rust-colored hair made him even more unique, unconventionally beautiful. Don't you wish to know what I've learned about you based on your decision to meet me? He asked with a coy smile, one I'm sure led him into the pants of many women. Tell me, what did you learn? I asked dryly. This was already going badly. I was here without Cade, itching to grab my phone and call him to my rescue. I inched towards the door, a movement Desmond caught. His smile widened to nothing short of reptilian. "I've learned that you're rash, and incredibly naive." A second later, two men appeared at my sides. They seemed to emerge from the darkness itself, and wrapped their meaty hands around my arms. Adrenaline and panic surged through me as I thrashed and snarled against their holds. I gritted my teeth as one put significant pressure on my shoulder, making it bruise and ache. I noticed the flash of something as one of the men pulled a syringe from their pockets. I vaguely remembered when I had first gotten injected, and scrambled to keep that from happening again. "Knock her out and we can snatch the red-haired one," Desmond mused, running a hand through his messily styled hair. "She might not be a white wolf, but I've always been partial to redheads." I snarled at what Desmond had said, but the action only made him laugh. "Also, when we're finished here, give Zayn Novak my regards. It was a cute alliance while it lasted, but we're more powerful than a spoiled child." Desmond chuckled. "As for her other mate, set him loose on Marcus. I'm sure Marcus will snuff him out eventually. At long last, I'll have the upper hand." Everything seemed to slow, and in the midst of my panic, I could feel my power bubbling beneath my skin. There was something radiating from the three men in the room, the two guards and Desmond Deville. It was like a light bulb beneath their skin, flickering with different colors and intensities. My power was attracted to those lights, like magnets. Panic and power rushed through me, and I latched onto those individual sparks and pulled. I was met with a wave of power that was so strong, I fell to my knees. I expected the two men to fall with me, to pin me to the floor and inject me with their poison. The men fell to the floor, but not to subdue me. The two thuds were loud, but muffled from the plush carpet. A wheeze that was supposed to be a scream left my lips. The two human-sized lumps on the floor were not moving, and they looked off. Their skin was grey and wrinkled, barely covering bruise-like veins that wrapped and crawled up the neck and arms. Their mouths were twisted open, and eyes were vacant and glassy. I wouldn't admit what I had done, even though I was vibrating with power. I had never in my life felt so strong, so indestructible. I had no choice but to face what I had done as I turned and met the horror-frozen face of Desmond Deville. I had absorbed the power of his soul as well, all without realizing it. Well, killing high table members, what will the illustrious Marcus Novak think of that? Jasper Fox scolded me, emerging clad in leather pants and a biker vest, from his hiding place in the kitchen. Chapter 94. Jasper Fox held the fourth seat at the high table, and was more of an enigma than anyone else I had met. He was quite literally covered in scars. They began on his face, a previous broken nose and some stitches to the cheek. All down his arms and back were scars. Rumors said there were even more beneath his pant line. Those particular words had been whispered by blushing she-wolves, witnesses to this entire debacle. They were too afraid to attempt approaching him, but had no problem whispering from the sidelines. Jasper was the only one who seemed completely disinterested in the entire meeting. Even as Marcus and Desmond spoke of using my abilities for their own gain, he hadn't batted an eyelash. His emotions reflected that relaxed demeanor, one that made me wonder if he had ever truly cared about anything. I began, but stopped as I met the frozen eyes of Desmond Deville. "I killed a high table member, the second to be exact." Desmond Deville was ranked just under Marcus Novak, which meant he was wealthy and incredibly powerful. My stomach twisted painfully, and I had but a moment's notice before I was bent over, hurling up the contents of my dinner. My nose burned and my eyes watered, but I couldn't register the pain over my frantic thoughts. It wasn't like I hadn't killed before. Many rogues died during the battle, especially when I used my ability to subdue them. This, however, was confirmation of what I was. A soul eater. What good could come out of a gift so horrible? What was even worse was how euphoric it felt, how strong and bloated with power I was. Disgust poured from my mouth in the form of acidic vomit. Jasper Fox waited patiently for me to finish. I stumbled into the connecting kitchen and rinsed my mouth with water, scowling when I noticed the blank look on his face. "Well, I'm sure you won't deny it again," Jasper said evenly, glancing down at the 3 bodies on the floor. He prodded at Desmond's corpse with his foot and nodded. "Never thought I'd see a soul eater at work before." "Really, though? Did you have to kill Desmond DeVille of all people?" "It's not like I had a choice, he attacked me." I snarled back, finally finding my voice. "I never meant to kill them, but they backed me into a corner." "Be that as it may, what do you plan to do now?" he asked, moving his head to the side. Jet black hair fell over his forehead, grazing a scar on the side of his neck. "Where will you hide the bodies? Or perhaps you'll confess and tell the truth, believing you'll be found innocent." I opened my mouth and closed it again before realizing he was right. I could tell the truth all I wanted, but then the world would know what I could actually do. There was no way I'd be allowed to live freely after that. "Cade," I whispered to myself, glancing up at Jasper. "My mate can help." "Can he?" "It seems he's already quite busy." "Searching for your lost mate must be proving difficult," Jasper mused, tapping his chin with a finger. There was some subtle shift in his emotions, some decision had been made in his head. "Run to your mate, Luna Claire. I'll clean this mess for you, but take care not to tell others of what happened here." Like any sane and rational werewolf, I scurried along. My heart raced with every twist and turn I made in the halls, convinced some of Desmond's men had found out the truth. I barreled into Cade in the hallway, colliding with a wall of muscle that made my bones groan. My hands were shaking as I shoved Cade inside the suite and buried my face in his chest. "Sweetheart. I could feel you panicking from across the hotel." He grunted, brushing back my hair until he found my paled face. Within seconds, I was scooped into his arms and surrounded by his rich, masculine scent. His arms formed a barrier around me, and made me feel protected despite everything. I could still feel the throb in my chest as I worried for Alec. As much as I wanted to curl up and stay in his embrace, I couldn't. There was no way I trusted Jasper Fox, and needed to tell Cade exactly what had happened. His eyes darkened as I told him the events in the last hour, ending with Jasper Fox's offer to help hide my mess. Cade pulled me to my feet and placed his lips against my forehead in a swift kiss before tugging me along. I jogged a bit to keep up with his fast pace, but I understood the need to hurry. As we opened the door to the suite I had been attacked in, my mouth clicked shut. This had to be the right room. I still had the note crumpled in my hands. The entire room was spotless. Even my vomit was gone, the carpet clean and white. "That's not possible, it's only been 10 minutes. I scoffed, unable to believe the scene before me. There was magic and then there was this. It brought an uncomfortable question to mind. If Marcus Novak kept white wolves as slaves, did the other high table members do the same? This isn't good. We're indebted to him now, and he'll want repayment." Cade grimaced, reaching out when a wave of guilt washed over me. I let him thread his fingers through my hair, and looked up as he tilted my head. His gruff voice was unusually soft, and it sent a little flutter through my chest. "None of this was your fault, sweetheart. If he were still alive, I'd hunt Desmond DeVille down myself. When Jasper Fox comes knocking, we'll handle it. It means he'll hold up his end of the deal, which keeps the rest of the high table from finding out what happened." You can be quite the optimist when you want to be. I pointed out with a small smile, just enough to get a gravely laugh from him. I have 2 roles to fill until we find Alec, which we will. He replied with a snort. Even though it physically hurt to be away from Alec for this long, I trusted Kate and knew that together we would bring him home. We had to wake early that morning, to meet with the others and plan out how we would successfully get the White Wolves into our territory. Garrett looked impeccable as ever in his crisp suit, while Julian looked a bit bleary-eyed. I couldn't blame him, not even the incredible coffee machine in our suite could wipe the cobwebs from my eyes. I was on my 2nd iced mocha of the day, and was already thinking about a 3rd. Nothing I love more than early morning war plans. Julian yawned loudly, stretching his arms wide over his head. Garrett cast him a sour look which he dutifully ignored. Especially with so much on the line. We're running on limited time. Garrett snapped, his thick eyebrows furrowing. This war, as you so eloquently put it, cannot wait for your schedule to clear. We've worked through some of the details so far, now it's time to put things in motion. Cade told me, cutting off any further bickering that might come from Julian and Garrett. Despite Garrett's put-together appearance, he certainly wasn't a morning person either. There's orchards below the southern border to Marcus's territory. We have some men planting supplies there in a few hours. They'll have to get themselves 1 mile away, to this abandoned railroad station in the woods. Marcus's men rarely leave the pack borders, but if they do, they always take the main road. They use vehicles for transportation and have always stayed on 2 legs. There are a few back roads going through the forest, they'll be used to get the White Wolves farther away. The next town over is almost an hour's drive. Once they make it there, we'll have them in an armored vehicle to the nearest airport. You were busy last night? I noted, staring at Cade a little starry-eyed. I was near positive Cade felt the flash of guilt that crossed my emotions, from the mess I had caused last night. You needed some time off. He replied, his lips twitching. Besides, I've never been a strategist. That's always been Alec's skill. I'm not nearly as good as he is, but it's nice to know I can handle my own. The second part of my high-table meeting began a few hours later. The anxiety in my gut chased away any remaining exhaustion from my eyes. We were escorted to the same room as before, and gathered in our own group at the center of the room. I counted the seconds, hearing the dull tick from the clock across the room. Cade's fingers traced small circles on my back, but I could hardly feel his touch. I was hyper-focused on the men entering the room, the 4 men with grave-looking faces. Chapter 95. Welcome, everyone. Marcus called out to the room, turning hushed whispers into silence. His suit was navy blue this time, which made his eyes seem brighter and more vibrant. This man was what most strived to be, attractive, charismatic, wealthy, and powerful. That's what's dangerous about the soul. No matter how beautiful you are on the outside, no matter what favors your appearance gains you, the soul can rot from the inside out. Many of the murmurs were regarding Desmond Deville's sudden absence. I listened to each and every one, forcing myself to remain calm. As I'm sure you all have noticed, we are missing a certain table member. Marcus lifted an eyebrow towards the room full of witnesses. He turned to face where I stood in particular, and though his eyes were not on me, I couldn't help but feel a bit paranoid. Desmond Deville was called back to his pack sometime early this morning. There is nothing to worry about, simply a pack misunderstanding turned into a larger inconvenience. While he regrets leaving ahead of schedule, he does hope to return before the conclusion of our final meeting. I tried not to let out my exhale of pure relief too loudly. As though my body couldn't help itself, my eyes darted over to where Jasper Fox sat. He wore a thick leather jacket this time, and his raven hair was brushed back from his head. I noticed the faint white line of a scar running across his forehead, and wondered how I hadn't noticed it before. I instinctively stiffened when my eyes traveled down, and I realized he was staring back at me. His pale eyes were unnervingly calm as they burned into my own. And very slowly, so gentle that no one would notice, Jasper Fox nodded his head at me. It was an expression that said, "I've held up my end, can you hold up yours?" With that being said, Nico Deville, eldest son of Desmond Deville, will take his father's place for the time being. He will arrive within the hour, and will be fully debriefed on everything discussed thus far. On our final day, should Desmond Deville be unable to return, his son will make an educated vote that represents his father's authority and expectations. There was some whispering that echoed through the crowd, and I turned my ears to each and every word that was uttered. I paused with bated breath, expecting someone to utter those words. There was nothing, no suspicion of foul play. I counted to 10 and let out a shallow breath, then intertwined my fingers with Cade. The last helped to relax me the most. Now that all announcements have ceased, let us begin today's meeting. Braden Cliff nodded towards the crowd, smoothing down the front of his platinum grey suit. He looked impeccable and professional, but there was a certain rigidity to his body that made him seem uptight and a bit unapproachable. "Sebastian, you were rather quiet our last meeting. Would you care to begin this one?" Braden asked thoughtfully, casting a cool glance towards the lowest high table member. Sebastian Sable had the most to lose out of any of these men. If I joined the high table, Sebastian would be tossed to the side. He would be nothing more than your average alpha. It was clear from his poisonous emotions that he was not joining my team in the foreseeable future. Yes, well, I needed more information before I jumped to any conclusions. Sebastian smiled at the room, but it was a completely empty gesture. It was like watching something alien mimic human expression and emotion, hollow and transparent. While it is my seat on the line, I wish to be as unbiased as reasonably possible. I do believe it would be best if Marcus here continued. In the meantime, I'd like to think over what we've discussed so far. The silent snort I let out under my breath was completely involuntary. I stiffened immediately after, praying no one had heard. Conversation continued to flow evenly, and no one seemed to bat an eyelash at my silent exclamation. "Ouch!" I hissed, my narrowed eyes darting up to Cade's face. I rubbed at the spot on my arm Cade had pinched and eyed him angrily. He glanced towards Sebastian and back to me before smirking. "Oh!" I mouthed sheepishly, "Sorry." Per our last meeting, we confirmed Ms. Claire's abilities and discussed what potential she might have in our world. Braden continued without missing a beat. While she seems to have control over her abilities, it's within the interest of our kind that we monitor this progress and ensure she matures into her powers with full control. That being said, she could be of use to our packs, ensuring our kind's success and all of that. Jasper Fox chose his time to speak up, tossing me a lazy smile with eyes that had far too much to hide. "How right you are!" Marcus agreed, a friendly smile on his face. This time his eyes turned to me, cold and calculating beneath his warm exterior. Cade's emotions turned brittle, but he managed to keep his rage contained while we stood in silence, unable to do anything but watch. Even though you know little about our world, you have an opportunity to make a difference. So rarely does something like this happen, and it is our hope that you might see this as an opportunity. While we each may have different terms and requests, you are in no way forced to choose. It is your right to accept or deny as you see fit. I straightened my spine and approached the center of the room as instructed. Only I could hear the pattering of my heart, which mirrored the whispers being flung from all sides of the room. I make no promises, but I will listen to your offers. I chose my words carefully, forcing myself to stare Marcus Novak in the eyes the entire time. He was not a stupid man. He knew I wasn't fooled, and I would no longer pretend to be. Any deal made with him would surely end in my death or enslavement. How many other white wolves walked into his land willingly, completely ignorant of what actually lie ahead? Though we communicate and work as one, we are 5 individual packs with land and customs of our own. As such, any agreements will reflect our singular pack. Marcus continued with a thin smile. His words were surprising to some, and murmurs erupted throughout the room. I only caught bits and pieces, but the words I heard were troubling at best. Words like, takeover, always share, selfish, and plotting, came from the mouths of some witnesses. Others denied it, claimed Marcus was doing what was best, and that he had more experience than any other high-table member. Many of these people trusted him, and for the life of me, I couldn't understand why. A flicker of surprise went through Jaspa, Brayden Cliff went still, and Sebastian practically ignited with rage. What Marcus had done was definitely unusual. As head of the high table, I believe I'll begin with what my pack might offer you in return for your time and service. Marcus gave little time in between for argument, and from the emotions picking at me, most were too terrified to interrupt him. I caught wind of the golden-haired Alpha and Luna again. They weren't afraid of Marcus and seemed to detest him more than anyone else. First, you would have my entire collection of knowledge at your disposal, including anything regarding white wolves. You also have access to my outside sources, should you need more information. It is known that I have a few white wolves living on my territory. I would be willing to transfer any that wish to move over to your domain. Most in my pack provide protection from rogues. Lastly, you must reside in my pack 4 months out of the year. There you will train and aid me in high-table matters. These months are up to your discretion, and your mates may attend as well. Should you accept my terms, I would welcome you into your seat as head of the high table, and provide as your mentor. His terms were surprising, to say the least. I had almost missed his last requirement, the one that promised my doom. 4 months out of the year I'd remain in his pack like I was an object being passed around. The crowd murmured and cooed at his generosity, while I wanted to snarl and shout. It wasn't a gift, it was a death sentence. What was even more surprising, Marcus Novak was cutting his longtime accomplice, Sebastian Sable, out of the picture. He was essentially handing me my seat on a silver platter, and kicking Sebastian off to the side. Sebastian would be lowered in status after this, made nothing more than a basic alpha. I was also fairly positive he'd lose whatever agreement he had going on with Marcus Novak. What a way to end a partnership! My legs buckled with the rage that blasted through him. Even from where I stood, I could hear the snap and creak of the wooden dais breaking under his fingers. His eyes conveyed hellfire within their depths, and it was all directed on me. I was no fool to what was going on. Clearly, Marcus Novak was the wealthiest of the alphas. He had the most assets and I'm assuming the whitest wolves. The other high table members only agreed to using me so long as it benefited them all. Marcus had flipped the script on them. Well, though it's pointless, I suppose I'll go next. Brayden cleared his throat and shifted in his seat. I could feel his discomfort with the situation, along with an underlying tone of worry. He met my eyes and I could feel a shift in his emotions. Curiosity and something else, possibly hope? While my collection of knowledge is smaller than Marcus's, I assure you, you'll find things even he does not have within my walls. I offer you my knowledge and my pack should you ever need my aid. Rather than force you to my own land, I would pay you monthly visits to ensure your development and magical abilities remained stable. There were a few murmurs as many caught the snide comment Brayden placed carefully within his words. In truth, his proposal wasn't a horrible one. It was essentially an alliance, one with a bit more stipulations. I smoothed any emotion from my face, but nodded at Brayden Cliff. Next was Jasper, who had reclined in his chair. He was currently cleaning underneath his nails with a serrated blade, paying no mind to the conversation around him. Brayden nudged Jasper, catching his attention. The knife was away in a flash, faster than my eyes could perceive. "Ah, my turn, is it?" he grunted, stretching out in his seat. He brushed back the inky hair that fell across his forehead and gave me a long look. When he spoke, it was slow and drawn out. I wanted to laugh for a moment. The man had the audacity to be bored, during a meeting that discussed my right to live. "I got no use for your abilities, kid. I can give you information, training, whatever you need. Wouldn't mind a powerful pack having my back and vice versa. You want an alliance? We can talk. I don't need a guard dog." Some part of me desperately hoped Jasper wasn't a shitty person, because he was the type of man I could see myself getting along with. He was strange for sure, but honest. This place was built on lies, and having the truth was refreshing. His offer, on the other hand, it had been the best one yet. It wasn't an offer of servitude, but one of an alliance. The only one who was silent was Sebastian Sable. It was horribly unfair how this entire thing was set up, and if he weren't a psychopath, I would have felt sorry for the man. There was no point in Sebastian offering me anything. I would accept one of the others and kick him from his place at the high table, that was an inevitability. 3 very generous offers. All of which could benefit our species. Marcus finally spoke, cutting a sharp look towards Jasper. "Should you choose one, contracts will be drawn afterwards. As well, these offers are on a trial period basis. We still do not know the full extent of your abilities, though we certainly know what you could be capable of should your powers hit full maturity. During this trial period, you will be closely monitored. Whomever you choose will ensure you have complete control at all times." It was a prison sentence, basically. No matter what I chose, Marcus Novak would get what he wanted. I could easily choose Jasper and decline Brayden and Marcus, but he would retaliate. No way would Marcus let me slip through his greedy fingers. What will happen should she decline all 3 offers? What will happen then to ensure she maintain control over her abilities? Sebastian Sable asked, his voice oily and beady eyes narrowed. He stood from his seat and spoke directly to the crowd. "You all are not thinking of the future. Yes, she might learn to control her abilities, but it is her who is able to use them. How can we dictate what she does with these gifts? What would happen if one morning, she wished to eradicate the high table? It would take an army to stop her. What ensures us that this day will never come? I am thinking of our future, of your grandchildren's children. What is truly best for us? This ability might have been celebrated in a time of war. We are at peace, right now. Perhaps, we do not need her abilities at this given point in our history. Even worse, she is causing chaos that has long been purged from the high table. I will not fall for the allure of power, no matter how the package might look. This she-wolf wields death, and she is here to bring war." Chapter 96. The entire room erupted in chaos. People on all sides shouted angrily, screaming obscenities and threats. They called me a monster, a beast that needed to be put down. Their words bounced off me, but their acid-stained emotions burned and slashed at me. There were some who did not join in on the chaos, the golden-haired couple being two who remained quiet and stoic during this charade. While horrible things were said, and death threats were thrown like spit from their bared teeth. The guards that lingered around the room were on alert, emerging from their places hidden amongst the crowd. They came out one by one, blending in with the people around them. I was genuinely surprised when each guard came to the center of the room. They stood around the high table and the section containing my family. I knew the high table would be first priority in a situation like this, but I hadn't expected my family and I to be included. During the chaos, Nico DeVille chose his moment to arrive. The oak doors that served as the main entrance were flung open, but that did very little to calm the manic witnesses. Sitting above it all, staring down at the chaos like an unruly god, was Marcus Novak. He did not intervene, where he certainly could have. These people would listen to him, they would quiet for him. He remained sitting, poised and serene as he watched the unfolding chaos. It was Jasper Fox who stood, slamming his hands on the table in front of him so hard that the witnesses who had been pressing forward, flinched back. Even I took a step back as Jasper's emotions registered with me. My skin erupted in flames searing hot as though it were real. His irritation and anger washed over me, just as his eyes met my own. They were not pained, nor were they haunted. They were frustrated and pissed off. As his eyes met mine, I could feel him suppressing those emotions, purposefully trying to dampen them. Perhaps he knew the strength of his own emotions. I was beginning to think that Jasper Fox must be much more than what he seems. Enough. His voice was whisper silent, but each and every one of us could hear him. There was another whisper or two from across the room, so quiet I had nearly missed it, but Jasper Fox did not. He lifted his head, and his eyes scanned the room. Thick cords of muscle moved beneath his leather jacket as he searched with his eyes. His lips twitched, and I knew he found the two poor individuals he was looking for. He speared them with his eyes, and both of the middle-aged males went completely still. I said enough. The entire room was quiet now, hardly breathing as nearly all of us cowered. Cade, of all people, happened to be intrigued at Jasper's outburst. I could hear several sighs of relief when Jasper slowly lowered himself to his seat. I could still feel the remnants of his anger, like a harsh sunburn that I knew would peel. While I wanted to meet his eyes and thank him for quieting the room, my attention was caught on Nico DeVille. Perhaps it was Desmond's genes, but Nico was a near replica of his father. The only singular difference was his eyes. Nico had the auburn hair and stocky build of his father, but his eyes were hazel in color. The green and golden tones seemed to show more, brought out by his tanned skin. I wasn't the only one with my attention on Nico DeVille. I could feel much more than I wanted to, and questioned how desperate some of these women truly were. I knew the type of person Nico DeVille was the moment his emotions registered in my mind. He was confident, satisfied, and utterly above it all. He sauntered into the room, basking in the attention while also managing to look cool and confident. Nico walked to the center of the room, but turned and met my eyes. It was only a second or two glance, but the damage had been done. Desmond's wrinkled body flashed behind my eyes, along with the two others at his side. I swallowed my guilt, even though it felt like a golf ball traveling down my throat. Nico approached the raised platform the high table sat at, and greeted each of the men. Marcus played the part as respectful businessman, Brayden was polite and a bit robotic, Jasper was uninterested and unimpressed, and Sebastian was still furious enough to spit hellfire from his nose. It seems things became quite heated. Nico DeVille commented with a haughty smirk. In no way, shape, or form did I miss the snarl that sounded from Sebastian's lips, nor the way his emotions turned dark and murderous. I wasn't sure whether or not Nico was speaking of Sebastian's furious expression, or the crowd that had once been shouting obscenities. Yes, well, it's in our nature, is it not? Marcus asked, his eyes narrowing just the smallest of amounts. Nico Deville was far too much like his father, without the brains to back himself up. Marcus stood, and the entirety of the crowd's attention moved from Nico to Marcus. Nico seemed to realize that, and had a few mixed emotions bubbling to the surface. Nico Deville, eldest son of Desmond, will now temporarily take seat at the high table. Once all 5 men were seated, Nico began to speak. My father feels the same as many of you. He began, addressing the crowd before turning his eyes on me. His eyes were pretty, earthy like bark and moss. It was his attitude that made my eyebrows inch closer and closer together. This she-wolf, we know so little about her. Facts are easy to come by, but who is this girl? Can she handle a power that brings all men to their knees? My father has served as warrior and protector of his pack for a decade now, and will continue to protect us, even if those battles might take place in the future. With every emotion of his that passed through me, my stomach dropped a little further. Nico Deville was very much not on our side, and I highly doubted he would be changing his mind anytime soon. If I hadn't been stunned silent by Nico's greedy and power-hungry emotions, I would have missed the man that swept through the crowd. He was dressed casually, in a black button-down and slacks. His hair was dark and just a little curly on the sides where it protruded from a dark cap on his head. He was dressed near identical to the other security guards, but I was certain he wasn't a guard himself. There was nothing special about this man, and I had almost looked away almost. Just as I turned my eyes, I noticed him veering to the left, towards where the high table members sat. The stranger, fast as lightning, approached Marcus Novak and dropped a note card onto the table in front of him. The split second Marcus's head was turned, was all it took for the man to slip back into the crowd. I tried to follow him with my eyes, but lost sight as a few seconds passed. Naturally, I was a bit curious. I watched as Marcus finished saying something to Nico, and happened to glance down at his hands. It could have just been a note, or some kind of reminder, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the man wasn't a security guard. He had moved so fast, he did not want to be caught. Marcus eyed the paper for just a second before slipping it into his hands. I had to give it to him, he was a natural. He smiled and nodded, replying to something Brayden had asked without skipping a beat. His eyes darted down for 3 seconds before flickering back to the crowded room. I could feel the moment those mystery words registered, because that perfectly carved stone that encased Marcus Novak it cracked. I could see it in the way his eyes flared, and his fingers twitched idly. From his voice and demeanor alone, you'd never be able to tell that this beast had nearly broken free from its cage. The note card was in his pocket before anyone could notice, and would soon be destroyed. Marcus stood and addressed the crowd, quieting any murmurs or whispers. His movements were slow, but I knew he was only trying to seem relaxed. While he was an expert at keeping his emotions under wraps, that crack was giving me a glance inside of him. While I couldn't feel any of his other emotions, I could tell that he was impatient. Marcus Novak was in a hurry to leave. The duties of an alpha are never-ending, and often not nearly as entertaining as one might hope. Marcus sighed to the crowd, who gave little chitters of laughter, like he had cracked a joke of some sort. I had to stifle my own laugh when Cade rolled his eyes. I have business calling me away at the moment. While it is urgent, it will not keep me from our final meeting tomorrow, where we hope to bring this issue to its end. Perhaps, Desmond Deville will return when I do. Until then, this meeting is adjourned. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates. link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.